Institute.
Good evening, fellow Kenyans, and Ramadan Kareem to our Muslim brothers and sisters. Sunday, the 20th day of July, the year 2014, National Anti-Corruption Steering Committee brings you Moving the Masses, designed to touch your hearts and minds, that you may run away from the vice of corruption. This evening we have as our guest Dr. Francis Kuria, who is the Executive Director of the Interreligious Council of Kenya, and our subject is the role of religion in the fight against corruption. Dr. Kuria, good evening.
Good evening.
Who are the Interreligious Council of Kenya, and what do you have to do with corruption? Talk to your countrymen and women.
Thank you, Prof. The Interreligious Council of Kenya is the coalition of all faith communities in Kenya. We bring together all the Christians, the Muslims, and the Hindus of Kenya into fellowship and dialogue to look at the problems facing Kenyans and seek a common position and common solution to those problems. And one of the problems facing Kenyans is corruption. And we do have our own design programs on how we address this issue of corruption and play our role, effective role, as the religious leadership of the country to bring down this vice.
Now, Dr. Kuria, this is a subject that is very important to all religions. And we as Christians go to church either on Sunday or Saturday, and we know the injunctions, the preachings of Christ. The Muslims go to the mosques on Friday, and they know the injunctions of Allah and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Our Hindu brethren go to their temples, and they know what Lord Rama and Krishna say. Yet, on a daily basis, we do things that go against their injunctions. Last week we had the police recruitment, and throughout the Republic it is obvious to everybody that corruption played a major role. These are people who go to church, to mosques, to temples. What is the problem, Doctor?
The problem with our country is that we have allowed ourselves to lower the moral standards we live by, the values that the country lives by. And as you know, Chapter 10, Article 10 of the Constitution did place quite a big emphasis on national values. Unfortunately, there has not been a mind switch so that we start living by the values enunciated in the Constitution, and by which all the religions hold dear. So I think the main problem is our consciences are not pricked when we engage in acts of corruption and any other vices. The man was created by God in his own image, and but from the first man we saw weakness, and we need every day to strengthen ourselves. So it's very important that we are here today to talk about how can we strengthen ourselves so that we can be able to deal with the weaknesses which is in the human heart that drives him to do evil. And that is the role of religion, to daily bring some relief to the people, not just in Kenya, throughout the world, so that they do not get overwhelmed by evil.
Dr. You and me and most of the congregation here, we are either practicing Christians or practicing Muslims or Hindus. We listen to the preachings in the church, but there is a sense in which we are neither moved nor touched. Throughout the week, we engage in our vices. We go to churches on Saturday and Sundays, to the mosque on Friday, and we return to our evil things in our different places. What are the practical things, beyond preaching, that an organization such as yours can do to help Kenya liberate herself from the vice of corruption, which is eating this country like cancer does?
Yes, religious leaders have various roles to play. Number one, religious leaders have a big role to set a high moral standard. They need to live a life that other Kenyans will be free and will be glad to emulate. The question is, have our religious leaders lived that high morals, given that high moral standards, and are Kenyans able to see these standards that they are set by the religious leaders? Number two, the religious leaders have a role to conscientize society, to teach them on a daily basis. As I said, the human being was created with an inherent weakness, and they need to be reminded all the time of the dangers ahead of them, of the weaknesses ahead of them, of the problems ahead of them, and of the temptations ahead of them, and they are given an alternative path to follow that leads away from vice. That's another thing. The religious leaders have another big role, and that is how playing the prophetic role. They must speak truth to leadership. They must speak truth to the people who are responsible for ensuring that resources are used prudently, that the police recruitment exercise is done above board. It's done in a way that Kenyans are satisfied with it. They're happy with it. It's very sad what happened last week when we had that police recruitment exercise. And it's even sadder when the leadership tries to defend something which is not really correct. So the religious leadership have a role to play the prophetic role of rebuking evil and ensuring that the leadership stays in the narrow path. And this is a role which the religious leadership have played, and maybe not very well, but maybe they need also to up their game so that continuously wrongs that are obvious, that are known, even without the need of trying to do very thorough investigations, the religious leadership can be able to speak truth to leadership.
But Dr. Kuria, just to put it in Kiswahili for our Kiswahili viewers, they're saying Wakenya wanaambiwa hawaambiliki. Ni sikio la kufa hata ukinyunyizia dawa haitibiki. Have we reached that stage where we have a country, you know, in our political setup, and the religious people are to be blamed. During the electoral period, you go to certain churches, and when they see a politician wanasema sasa ni sadaka maalum, they pray for all leaders to win for one seat, all of them, even if they attend. They say tumekuweka mikono. What is it that we must do? What is it? Because Kenyans are beginning to surrender to the devil of corruption.
That would be very sad. Nafikiria Wakenya wako wengi sana ambao wako nia mzuri, wako na fikra mzuri, wako na mawazo mazuri, na pia kuna viongozi ambao pia kwa kweli ni wema. Ni vile tu hawa zingiti haya mambo. Maybe we don't take corruption where it is supposed to be. But I believe that Kenyans are not beyond redemption. Kenyans are good. If you go to our schools, you find young people who have ideals. It's sad that in our universities, the idealism that was there in the early 70s and 80s was sort of eroded in the 90s. And we need to recreate the idealism in the youth, because they are good people and they are able to listen, and they are able to appreciate good and evil. The question of matoleo maalum, this is something which the religious leadership has to know. The balance of power in this country is tilted too favorably in favor of the politicians. We need to equilibrate power relations in this country. The politicians have taken too big a space in the public life, and they have taken too much power onto themselves. And in this way, there is a bit of hero worship of the political class in this country. If you read the newspapers, there's nothing other than what the politicians have said.
And that is a very important thing, because even religious leaders, particularly of the Christian persuasion, the Muslims are a little bit better in this regard. They treat politicians like demigods.
It's very sad.
With the net effect, therefore, that even when they engage in corrupt activities, they don't have the moral high ground to criticize them. If they have bought you a Mercedes-Benz, you can't criticize them.
Yes.
And that compromises, in my view, your role in this regard. What can we do going forward? Because there is no point lamenting about the past. Going forward,
I think
what is it that we can
we need to equilibrate the power relations in this country. And the leaderships, the various leaderships in this country must not accept to be trampled on by the political leadership. They must relegate the political leadership to where it belongs. And in that way, be able to speak to them on some sort of level, eye level, not on the top level. So I think, but not all faith groups are like that. There are specific faith groups which have this problem, but I think there are some senior clergy in this country who actually speak down on the political leadership.
Without doubt.
Without doubt.
But let us now, for a few minutes, engage the audience, which is a mix of Christians, Muslims, and Hindus. And we know this. What is your view? What do you think that our religious leaders can do? Let's hear you out on a question. Let's wait for the mic so that we hear you.
Antonio Moro. I'm a bishop. At the same time, I work for CODA as head of programs, and in conjunction with Action Aid International, I've come here under the courtesy of TI and the Nairobi Good Governance Coalition. I respect Francis so much, but the thing that I would have liked you to address is that the religious leaders were the panel of recruitment. They just concluded. We have never seen them coming out, voicing their concerns, that either it was above board or below the board. You are silent to date. The EACC have already voiced their concerns. Other organizations have already done so, but the religious leaders are silent. They are the light of the world. They are the light of the country, Kenya. Why are they silent?
And just leave it at that. Let us hear another concern. And let us be solution-oriented. That is the most important thing, not lamentation-oriented, solution. Let's hear somebody. Yes, at the back, please. Let's move the mic.
Thank you very much, the organizers. My name is Rebecca Otachi from the Evangelicals. I think the religious leaders have a great role to transform this country, because from Sunday to Sunday, they have the masses. And if we can start with being the role models, being the voice of the society, because if you can allow me to refer to the book of Luke chapter 3, John the Baptist told of the leaders of his days. They were religious leaders, but he told them what to do if they wanted change in society. At the same time, by being the voice of the society, we must be committed to transformation, for transforming the mindset of our people. Teach them in our mosques, teach them in our Christian institutions, teach them in our temples the right way of choosing leaders. But when we get involved, as you put it rightly, in the corruption, especially during the election time, you find that it's very hard for my follower to listen to me as a religious leader. So we must, as religious leaders, lead the congregation by example, speak out where there is evil, and help the masses to understand their role.
You put it well. Let us give, we hear you.
Thank you.
Rebecca, Dr. Mwiti.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think I need to say that in the scale of good, bad, better, if a nation settles at the level of good, it is good at the political level and at the religious level. And the behavior and the action and anything they do is limited to that level, such that the level better and best remain vacant in the nation. And we might be suffering from that kind of weakness in which we have not risen above just being good. And we can settle on that and remain on that, such that we do not have what I would call here a strong leader. Strong leader in the church or in the religious groups, and a strong leader in the political leadership of a country. When a nation fall in that level of leadership, all they end up doing is murmuring and complaining and pointing fingers to one another. And I think that is the area. The church, I'm sure Muslims have got the same idea, has got one strong statement which I think I don't see it very much in society, and that is being the light and the salt. Meaning that the religious group, and Christian especially, they should penetrate and influence every bit of activities in the nation. If we fail to do that, we'll remain only murmuring and complaining. And we can very easily, and that is the position I fear that the religious group can be pushed into, and we should be really working towards moving the other side. And the side I'm concerned about is being pushed to the reactive position, where you only wait to respond to what others are doing. You have not moved, or we have not moved to the position at which we propose and others oppose.
We hear you, Dr. Mwiti. Let us now come back to Dr. Kuria. Dr. Kuria, you hear what Kenyans are saying, and we want to hear from you. And you are a practitioner, you are an important body. The Interreligious Council is something that we know both within Kenya and without it. And in every country, in Uganda, for example, where I participated in the launch of something called Black Monday, the Christians said, we are not going to accept tithes from thieves. And thieves are known in this country. We know them. We just don't want to say, we know. If you ask me, I know them. I worked in an organization where I spotlighted thieves. Do you think that that is one of the things that you can do?
Definitely, Prof. I think that's one thing which needs to happen. We need to be able to bring out the issue of the court of public opinion. And I like what Anthony has said, that most people in Kenya, especially when we look at the last general election, when we try to apply the Integrity Act on the political class, when we're choosing leaders, they said the court has not declared me unfit to hold office. They have not, no law has declared me corrupt, and therefore I'm not corrupt. They fail to understand there is the court of public opinion, and this is a higher court, and the religious leaders have to be able to apply the court of public opinion by refusing to give prominence and accept tithe to political leaders who have failed the court of public opinion. Number three, the religious leaders need to take it even higher and remind the leadership that even there is another court, which is a higher court, and that's the court of God. And the court of God, you don't have advocates. You know, the advocates in Kenya are very good in making sure that the corrupt don't get the sentences they deserve. They are not PR firms, so you cannot manipulate the court of public opinion. They cannot buy journalists to manipulate what is written about them in the newspapers, because in the court of God, the justice is fair. And this is something which Rebecca has just spoken about. We need to speak the truth and be able to tell these people the truth. Anthony, just to tell you that this issue is live. The religious leaders are very much seized onto it. And you know, sometimes religious leaders sometimes wonder whether what we call megaphone diplomacy is better than the quiet diplomacy. Sometimes religious leaders.
But I hear you on that. I've argued this on somebody, but from a religious standpoint, and I say there are situations where you need the John the Baptist approach.
Yes.
Of shouting from the hilltops.
Yes.
And there are situations where you need the Nicodemus approach of going at night.
Yes.
So it is you to discern
It's
which is the most
is most appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are many religious leaders who take the John the Baptist approach, and they are very active on the public agora. But there are some who will not go to the public agora. So we must recognize this and give them a chance to do their work very well. Now, Rebecca touched something very important, and this is something I want to mention. Some of the work which we have done in Interreligious Council of Kenya, how do we help our people to choose good leaders? Because you see, if you choose bad leaders, you don't get out of this problem. And that's where we started. How do we get out of this problem? And you know, as they say, the fish rots from the top, from the head. We need to get good leaders in this country for us to move forward as a country, including on anti-corruption. And the Interreligious Council of Kenya developed a criteria for choosing a good leader. And we publicized this criteria. We went to the grassroots. We tried to do civic education in our limited way. And we called the religious leaders to account. But maybe we are not as effective. But this is it's not something which you will change the voting patterns in the country in one electoral cycle. We intend to continue conscientizing the people of Kenya on what is the criteria of a good leader. And that is very important because...
And Moses, rather Francis, let us hold that very thought, because we are with Dr. Francis Kuria, the Executive Director of the Interreligious Council, and Moving the Masses is a program that is designed by the National Anti-Corruption Steering Committee to move your hearts. You've seen yourselves the problem of corruption in the police recruitment. You've seen the recent declaration by the Auditor General that we cannot account for 33 billion during the Kibaki-Raila administration. These are things that we should deal with effectively. We'll be back with Moving the Masses.
SMS MUK to 31010 to download your favorite music. Remember, SMS MUK to 31010. Terms and conditions apply.
Taking pride in constructing tomorrow's skylines. Adding strength to Kenya's landmarks. Presenting the power for specialized constructions. Cementing the nation's future. Simba Cement, the strength and pride of Kenya.
Help make muscular pain glow away with Deep Heat. Because as it's absorbed, your body's natural enzymes turn its special ingredients into a powerful painkiller. There's no heat like Deep Heat.
If symptoms persist, seek medical advice.
Je, umewahi jiuliza ikiwa hakungekuwa na ufisadi nchini, tungekuwa na manufaa gani? Hebu nikupe taswira kamili. Kila mwaka nchi yetu hupoteza karibu bilioni 400 kutokana na ufisadi. Je, waelewa bilioni 400 ni pesa ngapi? Inamaanisha 4, 0, 0 na nyingine tena nyingine hadi jumla ya 11. Ikiwa pesa hizo zingetumika kujenga barabara, tungekuwa na uwezo wa kujenga barabara 14 za kiwango cha Thika Road kote nchini. Na kama zingetumika kujenga hospitali sawa na Mama Lucy Hospital, tungejenga hospitali 700, kumaanisha kila kaunti ingekuwa na hospitali 14. Na kama hizi pesa zingetumika kuwajengea nyumba wasiokuwa na makao, tungejenga nyumba za vyumba vya kulala 3, kuwapa makao familia 200,000. Usalama ungeimarishwa kwa kuwaajiri askari kutokana na hizi pesa. Pesa hizi zaweza kununua unga wa sima pakiti bilioni 3.5, ambazo zina uwezo wa kuwalisha watu wote nchini kwa miezi 6. Tungeweza kununua ng'ombe milioni 3 wa maziwa na milioni 8 wa kuchinjwa kwa nyama, na kuku milioni 800 kumpa kila mtu kuku 20 nchini. Hebu fikiria, si ni ushenzi kuwa na ufahamu huu kisha kuendelea na ufisadi?
Kupigana na ufisadi, jukumu langu. Kupigana na ufisadi ni uungwana. Ujumbe huu umeletwa kwako kwa hisani ya The National Anti-Corruption Steering Committee ikishirikiana na Uungwana Institute.
Wazalendo wa Kenya, tumerejea tena katika kipindi hiki ambacho kwa kimombo tunakiita Moving the Masses, na mgeni wetu hii leo ni Daktari Francis Kuria ambaye ni mkurugenzi wa taasisi inayohusisha madini mbalimbali, na jambo ambalo tunaliangazia hii leo ni kupigana na ufisadi. Na swali ambalo tulikuwa tukiligusia Bwana Kuria kabla hatujapumzika ni dhana hili lote la kupigana na ufisadi, na jambo ibuka ya kwamba Wakenya kwa kiasi fulani hawatingisiki katika harakati hii. Tumezungumzia swala hili la kuwasajili maafisa katika idara au huduma ya jeshi letu la polisi. Vile vile msajili mkuu wa serikali ametueleza ya kwamba tulipoteza bilioni 330 wakati wa serikali iliyopita. Je, swali ni hili. Nyinyi kama viongozi wa kidini mbalimbali, swala nyingine ambalo linaibuka katika taifa hili ni ukabila. Hata ukizungumza na maaskofu, maimamu, ukigusa mwanasiasa kutoka kabila lake, haoni ya kwamba mtu huyo atafanya kosa fulani. Je, swala hilo mnalishughulikia vipi katika harakati za kupigana na ufisadi katika taifa hili letu la Kenya?
Kwa kweli swala la ukabila ni swala nyeti kabisa katika nchi yetu, na ukabila uko katika dini, uko katika serikali, uko katika shule, uko katika kila mahali. Ni kama ufisadi, na zote zinakula katika ile tunaita trough moja. Sijui kwa Kiswahili naita nini. Kwa ile bakuli moja, ukabila ndio inapatia ufisadi nguvu, na ufisadi unapewa nguvu na ukabila. Na kama tunataka kumaliza ufisadi, lazima tutamaliza ukabila Kenya. Kwa sababu hata tuliona katika idara ya mahakama, kwa kweli mtu akiambiwa ufisadi kidogo anakimbilia kabila lake. Nasema tunamalizwa. Kabila letu lamalizwa. Tunapigwa. Na kwa kweli haya ni mambo ya kusitikiza kabisa, lakini we have a solution. And the solution is we have to know who your brother is, who your neighbor is. Most religions say, do unto others what you'd want them to do unto you. And if we call it the golden rule. If Kenyans internalize this, we'll be able to deal with this issue of ukabila. I like what the Muslims Quran says, the Islamic Quran says. It says that God created us into nations and into tribes so that we may know one another. Can you imagine a world where all of us were one tribe? It would be a very boring world. But we have used this beauty of God, this diversity, to actually injure ourselves, because tribalism injures ourselves. Because if you favor and employ somebody from your tribe who gives you worse service, who is suffering? Is yourself. So we must go for merit, but the solution is speaking the truth. And the religious leaders...
Francis, I hear you on that. You said something that is very important, that fish rots from the top.
Yes.
Suppose we were to ask you and President Kenyatta were to hear us, and in the course of next week, President Kenyatta invites you at State House and asks you, Dr. Kuria, corruption is a problem that affects my government. Tell me 5 things that I should do in order to eliminate this vice or reduce it to minimal levels. What would you tell President Kenyatta?
Number 1 is systems. Corruption is driven basically by systems, poor systems. And that is what Dr. Mutu was talking about, that most of the times we are reactive. The Public Procurement and Disposal Act is a guiding act. However, institutions have failed to put in place proper systems to fight corruption. So we know, for example, that these county governments, when they were formed, they did not have the institutional capacity to deal with the huge sums of money. And they did not, instead of realizing this and then using the Transition Act, which was put in place to give us transition over 3 years, instead we transited in less than 8 months, where the systems were not in place. So I would say, let us put the systems in place, especially in the devolved government, to actually deal with the resources that are being taken there. There's no point of putting resources in a system which has no institutional capacity to be able to deal with those resources.
President Kenyatta would say, I've had you on 1, 2.
Number 2 is you must change the mindset of the people. You must cause a national rebirth in terms of values. Values, values, values. And we were pushing this very hard, and we're still pushing this very hard, that we must emphasize values. That if this country is not driven by values, we can go nowhere. The promise of the new constitution will not be realized unless we change the value system of this country. And we must re-emphasize values. And if the president wants to change this country, they must emphasize values. That's number 2. Number 3, and it's tied to number 1, to values, is merit must be everything. You know, this recruitment exercise has just shown that we have not yet imbibed the credo of meritocracy. And this country you cannot deal with corruption if you know you got where you are in an underhand way, because you will perpetuate it. But if you know you deserve to be where you are, that you are there by right, then you are able to live by higher values. You don't have to maintain your position despite your mediocrity. So he must bring meritocracy into government. Unless meritocracy is re-emphasized, we will not deal with it. And number 4, and this is very controversial, and maybe this is not the view of the Interreligious Council of Kenya, this is my own view. We really need to interrogate very, very seriously and bring the public service into this discussion very, very clearly, that there is no way corruption will be dealt with in this country when public servants are allowed to do business.
We hear you, and that is straightforward. Number 5.
Number five, I think then we need to energize the anti-corruption agencies and mechanisms so that if you fall off these 4, then we can catch you and we can put you in jail.
Good.
And we can recover the money from you. I don't know, but the vigor of the agencies tasked with corruption, is sometimes not seen. It's sometimes not evident because we know we have put 1 or 2 middle-level fish. You know, we had the people from the Kenya Tourism Board who are put in, fairly senior people, but there is no flood. Given the level of corruption, the level of prosecution and conviction is wanted.
That is the DPP's domain.
DPP and also the investigative arms. I think the Anti-Corruption Commission also has some role to play in terms of gathering the evidence that is going to be used by the DPP to be able to fight. And also the police. I think the police have a role. I think also in this country we seem to have said corruption is the work of the Anti-Corruption Commission. So that although some of the
We hear you on that.
Yes.
Now you go, there is Mr. Odinga and his outfit say they want to save Kenya. You have crossed from President Kenyatta. We are being very practical. You cross to Mr. Odinga and you ask him, you want to acquire Kenya. What are the 5 things you tell him to tell the government? From the corruption, we are being very specific.
I think if I was to meet Honorable Raila, the one thing I would tell him, if you want to acquire Kenya, first of all, show us and show Kenya that the code-dominated counties are shining examples of good use of public resources. Put in place the mechanisms and follow your county governors constantly to ensure that there is no whiff of corruption. Then you will save this country, because this country has been killed by tribalism and corruption. How many of the people who your county government public service boards are they adhering to the 30% rule that not all public servants within your county are from one tribe? Are all your procurements correct? How many foreign trips are your MCS doing? Follow your people and make sure that they are shining examples. And therefore, the people will learn.
Mr. Odinga has had you on point number 1. Point number 2.
Point number 2, of course, the others apply to him. For example, corruption, the issue of tribalism is not an issue of government only. Our political parties are tribal parties. How are we going to convert the political arena into a less tribal arena? And how are we going to ensure that we do not pigeonhole other tribes, that we do not caricature other tribes? We must ensure that we live by a credo, by values that we all understand and appreciate. And the problem with our political processes is that they are completely tribal. They are completely tribal. This is, some political parties have tried to try and create and give prominence to other people other than people from their own backyards. But you find that the political parties and the ruling coalitions are actually ethnic.
Dr.
cocoons.
Kuria, Mr. Odinga has had you. Now, the Kenyan public, because this is not about President Kenyatta, it's not about Mr. Odinga and his party. The public have a role to play.
Yes.
The public. What is your role? Let us hear you.
And we'll eventually answer Dr. Mwiti.
Yes, we'll come to Dr. Mwiti as you conclude in a short while.
Thank you, Professor and Dr. Kuria. I think it's really interesting that this matter has come now to the desk of religious leaders. There are 2 things I want to say, Professor. One, the religion we have in Kenya, and I remember when you were starting, you quoted how we are religious in both religious persuasions, Muslim and Christian. Now the problem is the nominalism in these religions. These Christians, whom we are calling Christians, and we are lamenting that they are not practicing the ethics of Christianity. Basically, they are nominal Christians. And the sooner the religious leaders will take an initiative to give proper teaching and guidance to their followers, to remove them from nominalism to real religious practice, then we will not only defeat corruption, but several ethical and moral problems that are affecting this country. And indeed, the religious leaders have extremely well-placed opportunity to demonstrate, and not just to demonstrate, but to show the people of Kenya and the world that religion is really the most outstanding solution to a myriad of problems that are facing the people of this planet Earth. So with nominalism in place, it won't matter really the kind of leaders we are electing. It won't matter how much resources we are putting into the police force and the DPP and all that. Because these people in themselves, there is something inside them which has to be changed first before they can be given those responsibility. And that thing can only be changed by religious conviction and not by any other procedure or protocol or teaching or even code of conduct or ethics, which they are given a list of do's and don'ts. And they are told now, if you are going into the civil service, then this is the list of the code of ethics which you have to follow. And those code of ethics is actually not worth the paper on which they are written if the religion in you remains nominal.
We hear you that, as they say, Ukristo si jina la batizo na Uislamu si kanzu wala buibui. I think that is the message that you are sending us. Let's hear the good reverend there.
Yeah, my name is Reverend Omondi. Just for my friend Dr. Kuria, I think we as religious people, we also need to acknowledge that we have wronged this country. And we start from the point of recognizing that we have failed. Because, you know, if you go back a few years in history, you will discover the people like Muge and the Okulu and the Gitari. Those were firebrands that took the front line of the religious leadership at the time. I think we do need that prophetic voice, the John the Baptist type, that would rise up there and say, this thing is corrupt, stop it now. You go a few more years, you discover people like John who went to Gatundu and told Kenyatta on his face, stop this thing called the Tea Party that was in Gatundu, the oathing. And he stopped it. You know, we need people who could rise up at this time and tell the leadership class we are gone astray. But before we can do that, as religious leaders, are we corrupt? Are we tribalistic? Our church is tribal. And I think that is our failure. And we must start from that point of view where we clean our house and then stand out there and become the John the Baptist.
Thank you very much. Let's have the young Kenyan here right in front, please. Let's move the mic briskly so that we save on air time. Introduce yourself, and if you stand, because you are a little bit...
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Prof. I'm Michael Peter Dwar from Nairobi Good Governance Coalition, attached to Transparency International Kenya. I would like to thank Dr. Kuria for what she has actually presented to us. But again, on my personal view, I think that corruption is something that is a personal take. It is someone to decide whether to be a corrupt person or not to be a corrupt person. From the religious perspective, I always believe that religious leaders have the control of the masses because they are at the custodian of decision making in terms of their leadership. If we quit religious leadership and political leadership, that is now where we find controversial issues coming in. But when we start realizing our roles, where we live, we go it solely, we live the expectation of making businesses in form of getting some small cash and other stuffs, where you find that religious leaders are not standing up in the strongest ways possible to condemn the act of impunity that is done by our political leaders. I think the religious leaders are at a better position. They have the convincing language, and Bible is the best constitution that anyone could ever talk about. Because if we look at the biblical allusion point of view, there's a lot of areas where we get spiritual nourishment. And if we go by this nourishment, then definitely the church is going to give the clear direction.
We hear you on that. And I think what he's saying, and as a student of comparative religion myself, you look at the injunctions in the Bible. You look at the injunctions in the Holy Quran. You look at the injunctions in the Bhagavad Gita. You look at the Torah. The language is one, that corruption is a sin across all these. So what I hear the Reverend talking about is there a sense in which religion, where are the voices of Maurice Cardinal Otunga, Gitari, Okulu, Ndikaru wa Teresia, Ndingi mwana wa Nzeki, the imams. Of course, I do hear the voices of Bishop Wabukala, I hear the voices of His Eminence Cardinal Njue, but they are too few and far between. This is the question, I think.
It's true. Maybe the voices need to be stronger, more strident, and more frequent. And they need to occupy the space. The religious leadership in this country need to occupy the space that is necessary to speak the truth to the leadership of the country. But I just need to say something about what Reverend Ogot said and the young man about our roles and mention something we just had a chance to speak with Bishop Rotich about spiritualism. The thing is that spirituality is a function of religion. And if we just remain nominal and we fail to understand the spirituality of it, because evil is spiritual. And if we do not attack the spiritual aspect, and the religious leaders fail to bring out the spiritual aspect of fighting corruption, then they will have failed in this role. So I think it's very true that we need to look at evil also as the work of Satan. And there's nothing more evil than corruption. So we need to bring the spiritual aspect into this fight against corruption. And that's why the National Anti-Corruption Campaign Steering Committee is really got a lot of religious people.
Dr. Kuria, I hear you on the question of the spiritual aspect, and I hear the good Reverend Sunday Christians, Saturday Christians, Friday Muslims, Friday Hindus. They do their thing and they simply go to those worship places as social enterprise. Going forward, in 1 minute, I want you to speak to your Kenyans and tell them in practical terms what the Interreligious Council of Kenya is doing and is going to do going forward to be part of the solution in the fight against corruption, which is killing this country. And if we are not careful, it will kill this country.
Yes, I think number one is setting the standards. And I think the Interreligious Council of Kenya will be asking all religious leaders to actually set very high standards in their conduct, because it's by their conduct. This is what is servant leadership. I've seen a lot of people talk about servant leadership, but servant leadership is leadership by example, by doing your service so well that everybody learns from you. You lead them by what you do. And this is what the religious leaders will be required to do. And this is what Interreligious Council is doing, is calling on the religious leadership to set very high standards. Number two is going forward, we are going to be pushing, and we have already started this. We must also teach and engage our religious leaders at all levels on systems development, because without good systems, then they will not be able to. For example, in the county governments, we want to be able to ensure that resources do not get lost and then we complain about it. We don't complain about the 313 billion, which is already lost. Let's make sure that this year we don't lose some more. And what we are going to do is, we have a system. We are training religious leaders on the budgeting process.
On the training level, Francis, this matter can never end.
Yes.
And we will have another occasion to be with you, fellow countrymen and women. This evening we have talked about the role of the Interreligious Council in the fight against corruption. And the message from Dr. Kuria and his organization is that we all have a role to play in the fight against corruption. That is why the National Anti-Corruption Campaign Steering Committee, through moving the masses, is not in the business of entertaining you. It is in the business of pricking your conscience, that you may change so that this country can be better. This country will only be better if we behave ourselves, if we liberate ourselves from the chains of corruption. Kwa hivyo kile tunachosema ni ya kwamba lazima sisi sote tuchukue hatua za maksudi kuhakikisha kwamba tumejinasua kutoka kwa nira ya ufisadi. Mpaka wiki kesho, Maulana awe nanyi. Kwa Waislamu wenzangu, Ramadhan Karim.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
In your home, in your family, or at work, are things not going as you had expected and wondering where you'll get help from? God knows and has not forsaken you. Put your faith in God. You can now get inspirational biblical verses that will strengthen your faith via your mobile phone. Send an SMS with the word NC to 31010.